loyal members, and it's great to see names popping up there of new people joining us for the first time. So you are all very welcome this week. And this week we have the honour of Michael Brown with us. Michael and I first met back last October when I read his book myself, and we decided to meet, have a chat about it. And Michael is an entrepreneur. He's a founder, managing director, and now an author. And he is the author of this book, I Don't Agree. Now, it's not on the normal roster, I would say, of behavioural science, ABC, introduction to. So because of that, I'm just going to read from the back page, the back of the book rather, because it's a great summary of the book. Did you know you're likely to have had over 89,000 heated altercations with your closest relations before you reach the age of 8? By age 16, thousands more hours will have been spent by most of us in some form of disagreement with those in our extended social networks. As a species, we're well practiced at falling out with each other. We may even have a gene for it. Certainly, some of us seem to be gifted. When it comes to finding resolutions, however, things don't come quite so naturally. As much as 90% of all interpersonal conflicts never reach agreement, but it doesn't have to be this way. And this is, I think, why, as Michael will tell you, why Michael decided to write the book. He tells us, I Don't Agree is a fascinating exploration of new, powerful and surprising solutions to an ancient problem, why we disagree so much. Underpinned by cutting-edge research and academic thinking, real-life case studies. So I came across this book, thoroughly enjoyed it, and got in touch with Michael, and we had a chat about it. For the sake of all the people who've joined us here today, Michael, who are not possibly as familiar with your book, why don't you tell us, first of all, why you decided to write this book? What were the events in your life that led to the writing of this book?
Well, thanks, Louise, for the introduction, and hi, everybody. I'm super excited to be here this fine Saturday afternoon. The inspiration for the book, the catalyst, well, in explaining this, I hope it won't set me out in a bad light before we kick off. But essentially, I had spectacularly fallen out with my fellow shareholders in a business I'd run for nearly a decade as the managing director, as founder as well. And essentially what started as minor boardroom disputes over the direction of the enterprise, the everyday struggles, if you like, turned into what can only be described as a power struggle, which culminated after about 18 months or so in a very public display of what I describe in the book actually as white hot emotions on the office floor in front of everybody. So it wasn't very dignified behaviour, I must admit, and certainly from those who were there described it as compelling viewing. So I guess we could probably have sold front row seats on Ticketmaster. However, there's no going back from an explosive situation like that. And the aftermath of that, certainly it threatened the security of my young family, so young at the time. It was, like I say, it was over 11, 12 years ago now. It certainly disrupted the highly valued team I'd put together. Obviously, putting together a world-beating team is well, the investment in time and resource needed to do that is, you don't want to lose that easily. It certainly cost all the partners a small fortune in legal fees, because we all went in our separate directions, all got separate legal counsel, and then it elongated the situation still further. And the business we'd all given so much to essentially turned to ashes in the conflagration, essentially in the fire. Could we have done things differently? Could I have done things differently? Absolutely. But knowing how to, that was a different matter altogether. Obviously, after an event like that, you go into, well, it would be hoped that you went into quite a long period of self-reflection and self-examination. And of all the questions I asked myself in that period of reflection that followed, one did keep coming back, and it was this. Did my partners have a position in the argument that was at least as valid as my own? And it took me quite some time to reach any kind of position on this. And I guess only now with the benefit of hindsight can I confirm that yes, they actually did. And that's the thing about disagreement. It often escalates when you try to sort it out. Research has shown that people in dispute typically assume their own motivations are true and just, and the deadlocks, if you like, that prevent everyone moving forward are likely to be blamed on the other side by both sides. And that phenomena has been known to psychologists since the 1950s and labelled as attribution bias. And that's where we essentially seek out the evidence supporting our own position in the argument and our negative opinion of those on the other side of it. And you become blind to any evidence that suggests the other side might have a point. And in that way, our prejudices are reinforced, I guess. And so I guess my failure, long-winded explanation as to why I wrote the book, apologies, was to not recognise my own attribution bias in all those arguments with my business partners. And essentially that was just one of the phenomena I discovered that holds everybody back. So ultimately my issue, I didn't think was something that was common to me, this inability, if you like, to see things from the other side. But definitely I realised that putting yourself in your counterpart's position in the argument puts another option on the table, and that is the possibility of reaching a meaningful and honourable compromise, a way through the disagreement, so a way to properly collaborate. And it's that my lack of knowledge there that I thought I need to know more about this, the behavioural science of it, if you like. And that's when I embarked on I arrived at the idea of creating a user's, a layperson's guide to conflict, and which I called I Don't Agree. Is that slightly elongated?
Yeah, it is a very practical book in that towards the second half of it, you are offering advice. And often here in Behavioural Science Club, we're talking to people and learning how we can help others change their behaviour. But this very much, even though it does move on to talk about dealing with groups, it's quite introspective to start with. We need to look at our own way in which we conduct these types of conversations in order to move forward, which is obviously something that you found yourself. And something that I found really interesting at the start of the book, which I'll ask you to tell us a bit more about, Michael, is how relevant it is that people with us who've studied psychology will be familiar with this, the relevance of our position in the family, the siblings, the competitiveness, however large your family is, fighting to be heard. Tell us a little bit about the relevance of that, Michael.
Oh no, that is interesting. Yeah, that I think that was is certainly my starting point in the book, and that number that that number that you read out from the back. That wasn't me. Apologies, somebody else.
Sorry, we've muted him now. Go ahead.
Good. Well, that work, that figure 89,000, is the amount of if you've got siblings, is the amount of conflict situations you would have had with your sibling or siblings before you reach the age of 8. It's quite interesting, really, in that. So that work is those studies are from an American academic called Professor Laurie Kramer, who studies family dynamics essentially, and so she didn't do the maths. I did the maths for her, if you like, but she alighted on the fact that in all of her studies in that age group, the amount that conflict was a frequent visitor to the family, and in fact it happened 3.5 times every hour. For every day in between those age groups, so 3 to 8, so 5 years, and then I thought, well, Jesus, that is a lot. What's the maths on that? So I've got 3 kids myself, so I knew that in that age group, 10 hours sleep was probably about the recommended minimum. So I thought, well, that's 14 hours a day to have 3.5 conflicts with your siblings. So if you times 3.5 by 14, you get to 49. And then if you times 49 by 365, the amount of days in the year, and then you times that by 5, that's 89,425 conflict exchanges. So if you imagine that with that amount of rehearsal, you're getting brilliant at conflict, but you're not getting the same amount of practice in reaching a resolution. Sorry. And then that took me further into the studies. I don't know if I'm sure everybody's heard of Malcolm Gladwell and read lots of his books, but he's got one of his great books that really resonated with me, and I read it a long time ago. It's called Outliers, and you may be familiar with that book in that it posits that anyone who's been successful in any walk of life, in arts, culture, politics, business, has actually reached a minimum benchmark of practice in the things that they went on to become rich and famous in, which is 10,000 hours. And they've done that before they reach a very young age. And that's now become the 10,000 hour rule, which is famous thanks to Malcolm Gladwell. And I thought, well, I wonder if I can get to 10,000 hours if having an argument. And then, so I pulled all the research from sibling rivalry, not from just to 8, but also in middle childhood and also in early adolescence, and certainly the hours you've spent in conflict in those 89, so up to the age, is nearly 5,000, and then it gets to well over 10,000 by the time you reach the age of 15. So I put forward the notion that we're actually, by the time we're 15, we're all geniuses at falling out with each other, but at the same time, again, we haven't had the practice in reaching resolution. So we all come into those early stages of life as fighters and warriors, or certainly argumentative types, or predisposed to falling out as opposed to finding resolution. So and then going back to your position in the family dynamic, that lots of research. I will post it in because there's loads of stuff about lots of people who went on to change the world in their particular fields of endeavor were actually latter born, and in their sibling group. So they weren't first, they weren't second, they were third or later. And the reason for that was their own struggle to find a niche to divert parental attention away from the firstborn and the secondborn by truly differentiating their personality and character in order that their parents would find something to invest parental resource into. So yeah, fascinating stuff, and loads of great research, most of it out of America on that as well. So all of that was, well, that's before we get in, step foot in the door of our first jobs. And, we're born competitors, not collaborators. And so our genetic motivations are veered towards conflict and not collaboration. And the whole book is then, how do we reverse engineer that? And what are the tips? And what are the things, what are the pitfalls? What are the things we need to look out? What are those genetic triggers like instinctive threat system and fear of dissimilar others? Those kind of things. Did that answer your question, Louise? Again, I was so...
It most certainly did in great detail, and I can remember reading about it being the latter children, and that's a kick in the teeth for anyone who's the oldest child in the family, as I am. But then also as a parent of 4 children who are rather old school, like to absolutely advise them how to deal with things. It delighted me because we happen to be people who, when we see parents letting old Tiffany learn it in her own way and make her decisions, and we were like, for God's sake, you need to lead that child, So it interested me as well in terms of the research that came out of that particular psychologist when she said that it is beneficial to intervene and guide a child in terms of how they could deal with these things. But maybe move on to the other extreme, Michael, which is the work you told us about in terms of professional negotiators, which is the very furthest extreme of dealing with an argument. You talk about the CIA and people who come in for professional negotiation, which really interested me. Could you tell us any more about that, Michael? It's a particular skill, isn't it?
It is a particular skill, absolutely. But it's interesting because I see our conflict journey, if you like, that you might do a whole load of professional training in negotiation, but you never really lose those things that shape you. So I think it's about being aware of those genetic triggers, if you like, that as you walk into the room. And there's, if I wanted to pull 2 or 3 of those, which probably may be familiar to anyone who's studied behavioural science, there would be the thing to be mindful of, particularly for professionals, is the instinctive threat system. And we'll come to how you navigate around it a bit later on in the talk, hopefully. But so instinctive threat system it's an internal alarm. It warns to danger by creating feelings of anxiety, of fear, of aversion, in order to motivate us to action. So it triggers our fight-flight response, for instance. And in fact, it's the reason that everyone here is able to log in and watch this session now, because in prehistory, a countless number of our direct ancestors successfully deployed the system in all manner of dangerous confrontations, perhaps during an unexpected encounter with a saber-toothed tiger while out for a stroll with the family, for instance. But here's the one thing, though, it doesn't necessarily need a moment of danger to trigger it. So because the instinctive behavior is hardwired, we are actually biased towards processing threat-based information. It captures our attention more powerfully than positive information. So essentially, we're subconsciously vigilant at all times. It permeates our interactions with family, friends, and yes, when we get into professional life, colleagues, teammates, our bosses. So for some of us, the smallest criticism of our actions can get the adrenaline running with its attendant bodily reactions, so the increased heart rate, the sweating, the anxiety, and even outright hostility to the other person in the conversation. And I'd urge everyone on the call to think back to their last performance review. So your memory of it won't be the superlatives used to describe all of your good bits. It's the areas for improvement that stick in the mind, isn't it? The bad bits, and they're the bits that live long in the memory. So, and it's those negative bias triggers, threat-based emotions such as fear or anger, which then motivate us to protect ourselves. And that may result, after thoughtful consideration and a deep breath or two, in an attempt to improve on our weaknesses. Or on the other hand, it might be, and I'm speaking in metaphors now, slamming our fist onto the red button to launch angry missiles at our perceived tormentors. If you think about Donald Trump, and I know, thank God, he's consigned to political history, well, hopefully, but one of the reasons he's so readily and damagingly took to Twitter all the time, for him it was, I guess, a social media version of DEFCON 1. So such is the volume of criticism he got, his instinctive threat system probably went into overdrive. So that would be one thing. And the other thing, I think, which is pertinent for any professional negotiator as well, is recognizing, and this is really pertinent right now in the present day in context of all sorts of things, Black Lives Matter, institutional racism, all of this, and that and again, should be familiar to people who are studying behavioural science, is the fear of dissimilar others or out-group hostility. So if anyone, I've kickstarted many an endeavour, and but if anyone, if it's a band or a business, a party, protest march, or these are things, I described this in the book, I suppose, and it often takes a single-minded catalyst who gathers together a small collection of like-minded souls, if you like, to get an endeavour off the ground. But if you take a closer look at that founding group, it's likely they'll have lots more in common. So, and I'll refer you to this study. Actually, there's a study. It's called "Not Like Me Equals Bad." It's a study an ongoing study actually by a whole load of people out of the University of British Columbia, out of Chicago University, and out of Yale. And the opening lines to that, and I'm going to try and quote verbatim, contain a statement that doesn't seem like you're learning anything earth-shatteringly new, if you like, that the adults have a liking for people who are similar to them. So that makes sense, doesn't it? It shows, for example, that people tend to choose partners, life partners, they believe to be of similar physical attractiveness as their own, to their own. So, and we sort of all get that, don't we? It's why we all smirk. I don't know if you all heard that backhanded compliment that somebody is, in inverted commas, punching above their weight in the dating stakes. So they've broken the rules of attraction. But there's a flip side, there's a darker side, which is we tend to dislike those who are not like us. And time again, dissimilarity is a high predictor for the avoidance of others. And not like me equals bad supports all of these assertions. So get this. So we anticipate that people who look and act like us, and this is spellbinding, they'll be fairer, as in more just, they'll be more trustworthy and more intelligent than those who are different. So that is quite frightening in many ways, isn't it? If you think about that without justifying it in any way, you can begin to see where things like unconscious bias and institutional racism, you can begin to see where that sort of behavior comes from. Again, as I said, very anxious not to justify that kind of behavior, but you can see sort of where that sort of thing comes from. So that sort of fear of dissimilar others is something we need to sort of recognize in ourselves. It's an evolutionary hardwired behavior, and it was about survival in prehistory, but obviously it's something we need to be less fearful of now. So I just thought that phenomenon, I talk about that in the book a great deal, and how we might navigate around that to beat unconscious bias, those kind of things. So that's, isn't it? I would agree that's explosive stuff. For if you believe yourself, as I do, and like to think that I'm broad-minded, I'm inclusive, I'm without prejudice. I like to think I'm all of those things. But now I'm in possession of the kind of knowledge. I've started to check my check my motivations. That would be a good way of describing it when making any kind of decisions affecting people's lives. And that might be a choice of, in simple terms, who to hire, for instance. You know, I'd like to be certain I'm not simply hiring a version of myself, if you like. So,
absolutely, absolutely an issue, isn't it, Michael? Absolutely, so much pertinent at the moment. The diverse stuff. So I think I kind of hogged you for long enough, Michael. It's a fantastic introduction to the concepts behind your book. I'm going to hand over to Prakash just to have a chat with you himself, and then there's lots of chat going on at the side from the members. So I'll then draw in a few of you to put your questions to Michael.
Thank you, Louise. Michael, welcome to the group.
Thank you.
We have a couple of people who have joined us, I think, for the first or very first time, at least first or second. There's Amit Kaul.
I hope
Sharma. Yeah, Michael, you say?
I said, I hope I haven't put them off if it's their first time. Sorry.
Right. So no,
yes, hello everyone.
We're going to have a good time. Yeah, hi. So I can see some of us joining us here for the very first time. The protocol is quite simple. We keep our videos on, mics off, but we go into a gallery view so that we can see each other's faces. As much as we'll listen to Michael, we also want to know each other, who else is out here in the group. We want to know Hamza, for example, we want to know Rachel, and we want to become friends with them as time goes by. So we will do that. That's how we become a good, strong group. And I think in 5 to 10 minutes, we're going to open up it for the entire, session for Q&As. So please have your questions ready and put them up on the chat box. Louise will be kind enough to moderate the session. And what I noticed was a good amount of chat right now has been around parenting. I think the whole discussion around parenting, 10,000 years of practice right in the beginning, from your childhood till the time you become a teenager. And boom, I'm so good at fighting with people, right? So I want to tie this on to a research that we had done, and we found some supporting evidence for it when you're working for another project around a year back for an educational lab for kids. And as we are studying kids and conflicts and why they behave what they behave, we found out that there were a good amount of myths or wrong parenting practices that still persist till today. And one of them is around the whole approach towards conflicts. When you have more than one child, or even if you have a child, and if your kid is, let's say, in a conflict with his or her friend, what are you supposed to do as a parent? And there is certain wisdom right now in the world saying, this is the right approach. But that research, and even what you talk about almost right in the beginning in the book, says, no, that's wrong. So please help us understand that research, saying, how do you deal with your kids having conflict with other kids? And tied to that, if I have a conflict with my spouse, is my kid supposed to observe it or not? Like, what is the science on that, Michael?
I'm reading in between the lines. You're having, yeah, you have some problems there, Prakash. Yeah, okay. Well, well, interestingly, on the going back to the Laurie Kramer work, the 89,000 conflict incidents. I was taken by a phrase which she uses, and it's sort of, and it's almost when you see it written down, it's almost designed. I think I referred to this in the book. It's almost designed to seem like it's good parenting behaviour, but she called it passive non-intervention, which is the default position of most parents, as it transpires, as it turns out. Passive non-intervention is the thought that you let kids get on and sort out their own conflicts. So you sort of leave them to it. You take a back seat on that, and that. Certainly thinking about when my kids are 20, 18 and 16 now, so all of that's a long way off, even though they still fall out fairly regularly. But passive knowledge, and so that is the default way to deal with that, or the accepted way, but it transpires that isn't the way. You need to actually, as a parent, you have to actively get involved. And then you have to, what you need to do is to try and get them to revisit the conflict at some point when the heat's died off a little, and then get them to engage them in dialogue with you as the mediator, where you try and get them to take the position of their brother, sister on the other side of the argument, and imagine how they might feel if they'd been put into the situation themselves. So seeing what it's like from the other end of the telescope, if you like, and then you repeat that exercise. And I'm going to and so that was one thing. But I then I took that and I transposed it to adult life and in context of the professional situation. So this might help actually, Prakash. So and I'll just give it a little bit of preamble, a bit of sort of history. So the lifeblood of the businesses I run and have founded are the creative business or ad agencies in simplistic terms, but selling campaign ideas to advertisers. So the creative industries, and in fact that is a space where there is much conflict, and indeed most creative people would contend that in order to create exceptional creative work, conflict is really vital. So that does make managing creatives an interesting behavioural study in perspective taking, and that's what it's about, perspective taking. So if you think about, say, on the one hand, you have thinking about creatives now, so not just not adults per se, but creative adults, if you like. So on the one hand, you've got a person who's sensitively attuned, if you like, to the finest. And I'm going to try and pull words out of the book, sort of the finest vibrations of not only their deepest feelings, but of those of the rest of humanity. So if it were otherwise, how could they meaningfully connect with an audience? Because that's what creative people who work in advertising do. They have to connect with an audience in order to sell them something in brutal terms. But on the other hand, you've got a person, the same person may also be willing to shed blood at any perceived slight of their creative output or ego. And so I have witnessed so many really, really extremely assertive defenses of creative territory in order to ensure that that a campaign idea is the one that makes it through to the pitch to the client. So and obviously creatives falling out with each other about the validity of their own ideas in context of the other one. So for me, I lighted on this exercise, which I think everyone can be used in real life, in ordinary life. So to understand the true perspective, if you like, of two people with differing, in this case, creative approaches to the same client brief, when as I said, both are really vocal about the advantage of their idea versus the inadequacies, if you like, of the other. I resort to this particular exercise, and it is based on, so not Laurie Kramer, but a psychologist called Carl Ransom Rogers. He was one of the contributors to the theory of self-actualization. I don't know if you know what that is. Self-actualization is the person you aspire to be. It's when you become that person at some point in the future. So the behaviors that you aspire to actually match up to your real life, real world behaviors, self-actualization. So Carl Ransom Rogers is the basis of this exercise. So what I get is, I get the creatives, I ask them to take it in turns, and without interruption from the other person, outline the other's creative concept. So the rival scheme, if you like, that they didn't create. Have I got you so far? You're staying up with me. I then ask the original creator to confirm whether or not the other has grasped the idea as he or she originally conceived it. And then we run the exercise in reverse. And if either fail in that task, then they've clearly not been listening. They've not been taking perspectives. So they haven't taken that wider perspective, which you need to reach to create, which you need to take to create, to reach a resolve. And they haven't seen things from the other's point of view. And once you've got that realization in the room, then from there you can work forwards to try and reach a resolve. And certainly in this exercise, certainly in my professional life, the failure of both sides does happen a lot. So that is that perspective taking exercise, going back to Laurie Kramer's work, is that actually encouraging young kids, with you as the adult mediator, to take perspective. And that is an exercise. That exercise I just outlined is one way of doing that. Asking your kid or your spouse in your situation, Prakash, to say, and vice versa. You also have to try and understand her perspective too. Did that make sense?
Absolutely, Michael. In fact, the exercise where you kind of tell the other person's story back to them till they say, yeah, you got it right. And then you do the second round of it. That was the second question. And it is what ties down to that whole discussion we had briefly about the whole Star Trek universe, saying, if you want to eventually get down to a place where you want to have different species being able to communicate in spite of their cultural differences, an exercise of this sort is very, very helpful. For people who are listening in, this is right in the beginning, I think preface or the first chapter of the book, a fantastic exercise. If you forget everything else about the book, right, once you read it, if you could retain one thing, I think this should be that one thing. It will be for me. Rephrase the other person's point of view or story. And if they say, yep, you got it right, and then let them, do it for you. And, if you can then agree and say, okay, fine, you got my point of view, I got a point of view. I think just this act of talking itself kind of resolves conflicts very easily. And we are going to open up the Q&A session, but I want to quickly draw attention, Michael, to these two news pieces. Okay. Number one is Bill Michaels' resignation. He was the boss at KPMG UK. This was the whole thing. This is telling his staff, saying, stop mourning, stop playing the victim. And, this is him, right? Yeah. And then we have another story, which is diversity chief, has been facing claims of bullying. And this is, I think, Dimple Agarwal, right? And so the question here becomes, what's happening? So and this is not someone at a lower level or at a 5 years, 6 years, or just some. These are supposed to be the brains, the mind who put things together, right? So, and I understand you started the whole conversation in your book also with the story of failure.
Yes.
Right? Which is not what people do. People talk about their successes mostly, right? So what's your take on what is happening and why this is going to keep on happening again? We are always going to keep on hearing about this. What exactly happens, here?
Well, certainly those two situations you brought up onto the screen, actually, I mean, they're difficult to answer. So what's going on in general, from a general terms, so a broad brush, I would put down to again to build on the same sort of thing. It would be about collaboration and our I want to touch on two things. I want to talk about equality, because that's what that touches on, and I want to talk about our inability, if you like, to collaborate. And I'm just going to try and pull up there's some research I've been reading of late, and I mean that sort of victim culture. I mean, I'm not sure where he's going with that. He certainly should have checked his emotions before. You know, he should have. Yeah, that's the thing with instincts. They tend to shoot and ask questions later, don't they? And then before then it's too late. But if this is the thing, I've just pulled it. I'll check a link. I'll chuck a link into it, or send it to Louise. But I think it goes back to that. I'm going to call them tectonic plates. In that, humans evolved to be, didn't they, both competitive and collaborative. So the tectonic plate metaphor is that they're constantly butting up against each other and grinding together to create heat. And I think there's a study, and it's not very snappy. It's from 2015. It involves 106 European and US companies participating over a period of 6 years. So it's a really exhaustive piece of work, and it's the socio-structural view of resistance to collaboration strategy. It's not a snappy title at all. But there was one thing, and I think might be salient to these 2 points about territoriality and turf wars, and you owning the space and being unquestioned because you're the boss. But so that research unerringly and maybe depressingly suggests that we're not very good at collaboration in business at all, despite the advantages that it would confer on us if we were good. But 73% of those companies taking part in that piece of research cited turf wars and territoriality as the most problematic barrier to effective collaboration. And it highlights loads of evidence that shows partners can not break out of their own siloed mindset to make collaboration happen, to let other people's points of view into the room. And it contained, there was one telling remark which I do include in the book, and it's anecdotal, and it's made by one senior manager in the research, and it says people are more concerned about who will get the glory or the blame if a collaboration project or a business decision goes right or wrong. And that sort of resonates with me. I did a period close to when I was finishing the book, I did ask a very close colleague to help me with this particular collaboration project, strategic partnership that we were trying to forge. And he did have a momentary faraway look in his eyes, which seemed to suggest for me that he was mentally struggling for the unobtainable, and said, collaboration, what's in it for me? So it's a sort of selfish, the act of collaboration isn't, or it shouldn't be a selfish thing, but collaboration, cooperation seems to be also, doesn't it? Seems to be actually, it's not altruistic, it's selfish, because collaboration evolved in order to inculcate ourselves further into a group, to convey to the group that we had skills, abilities, personality aspects that were useful inside a group. So, but therefore that helped us prosper and progress in the group and survive in prehistory. So, so that, I think those things in context are interesting to those 2 particular situations, that siloed mindset. And then the other thing I think where that goes to is values. So those 2 situations, Prakash, where sort of went against, if you like, the values of the businesses that they represented. So those 2 leaders should have been walking the walk, talking the talk, and obviously they plainly.
In your book, Michael, you mentioned this phrase, It's fun, and I think people should read this book because there are fantastic stories like this. Physician, heal thyself. It's a lovely phrase which Michael puts out there in the book, and it's an old, I think, Greek phrase, if I'm not mistaken, and then it comes down to the time of Jesus. And if I'm not mistaken, I think even he kind of uses this. And we'll also figure out stories about how did Jesus also provoke conflict? Was he also not good at managing this in the beginning? And did he learn what happened out there eventually, right? So physician, heal thyself, as in people who say, I can do this thing. Better watch out what you're doing because the world is watching out for you. Louise, I'm going to ask you to please start moderating the questions. We have a lot of questions. If we end up exceeding the time limit by 5-10 minutes, Michael, I hope that's cool with you. Because we've got a lot of questions out here.
Okay.
All yours, Louise.
Okay, yeah, lovely, Michael. I can see everyone nodding away as you mention all these different scenarios, and I think you've answered quite a few questions in the conversation, particularly maybe Jing's question about the style of dealing with an argument, the dance, I think she said it was. But I'll just tell you, there's been stacks of chat, and a lot of it started off with questions about the sibling position, people who maybe have no siblings. Does it make any difference how many brothers and sisters you've got? So there's a lot of chat going on there. And the particular question I want to pull out then that fed on was from Joanne, moving on from when we were talking about parenting skills, and I think people are saying Donald Trump's parents possibly have a lot to answer for. Joanne was asking, see if I can find your question, Joanne. It's to do with maybe, as Michael was talking about diversity, and you're talking about gender balance. Would you like to put your question to Michael, Joanne?
Yes, Michael, thank you. It's been a great talk to listen to, and really, as Prakash and Louise have said, it's resulted in a lot of chat about our different views. But yeah, no, I was wondering in your, if it's not too uncomfortable to go back to your initial story about the boardroom meltdown, was it, do you think that perhaps the gender balance would have been a factor in that? What is important to men in an argument, or what's important to women, and they're very, the status is very important for men, while maybe women are more at times, it just depends on the personality, collaborative, but we all remember Margaret Thatcher, but so that's what I was wondering. Do you think that if there was more of a gender balance in that situation, would that have a better outcome, or was that?
No, yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. And I'm really, really happy that you asked me. So was it Joanne, did you say?
Yes,
Joanne?
yeah, Joanne.
No, thanks for the question, Joanne. So I'm going to give you a little more history about the book then. So the publishing deal came about. So back in 2018, I was asked for International Women's Day so the Telegraph. So I was, before being an author, I'm also a writer, and I do contribute. I've contributed to the Telegraph, the Daily Telegraph, quite a few times. And I'm saying that politically, I'm not the Telegraph. I'm the other side. I'm left. But I'm a contributor, because there's no point in preaching to the converted. So I try and do stuff for the Telegraph. Anyway, on International Women's Day 2018, they were doing a feature on women in business, a pull-out supplement. And then the features director suddenly, a lady called Victoria Harper, suddenly realized that they probably needed a male perspective from a male business leader, just to give she contacted me because she knew that my business. So I've just come out of the business I set up 9 years ago. I'm in the process of setting another, but I had a 50-50 gender split on my board and no gender pay gap, and we had lots of stuff about allowing female voice into meetings and stuff like that. So she wanted me to write a feature that was contributed to the Women in Business thing, and I did that, and it was called Woman Up. So which was it was about 1,200 words, paper online. And woman up was I guess a little dig at that dreadful phrase, man up. So it was about how men can woman up at work, if you like, and to discover a bit of some of that stuff to avoid conflict. So I did a whole feature on that, and then and it became the book because when Vicky said, well, what do you want to put in your byline? And I said, oh, can you actually not give me the fee, because you don't get, so you get, for anyone who's interested, you get 40p a word. That's the going, so it's not too much money. So I thought, well, don't do that, put an advert for my book. And they said, oh, have you got a book? I said, no, but it's an idea for a book, is it? So this is I don't agree, put a little advert at the bottom of the piece. And they did, and then the publisher rang me up about 2 or 3 weeks later and said, oh, we saw your piece in the Telegraph, can we see your book? And anyway, it went from there. I didn't have a book, but so it came out of the gender conversation at work. And there's a section in chapter 5 of the book deals with this particular, so I elongated that to a few thousand words, called Woman Up. But there's some lovely stuff in it, and you're going to love this, Joanne. It's going to, so going back to conflict. So one of my things is that we're all familiar, aren't we, with the fight-flight response. So, and again, that's obviously triggered in work life environments a lot. Now, did you know? So the person who came up with that phrase was a man called Professor Cannon, who unveiled that clinical research way back in 1932. And then, get this, it became round about 2000, a whole load of academics, again, California-based, in looking at that research, realized it had all been done on men, no women involved in the research trials. And so they started, so the lead on this was Professor Shelley Taylor from California, so a woman. And so she, and there was a whole load of stuff. So it's fabulous stuff. So they said, well, actually, do women behave differently under stress then? What do we need to do to find that out? And at the time, coincidental to that, there was another discovery of a gene called the Sry gene, which was only thought to exist in utero previous to the discovery, around about the same time, about 2000. And the Sry was previously thought to just trigger the descent of the testicles into the fetus about 6 or 7 weeks in from conception, after conception, and then decide whether that fetus is male. And that was thought to be hitherto the only use for that gene. It then transfigured that men have that gene all over their body, including their adrenaline gland, and they linked that to the stimulation of all of those fluids, which then gives rise to the fight-flight response. Women don't have the gene at all. So they then at Science alighted on this thing called Tend and Befriend. Have you heard of that? So women's stress response is called Tend Befriend. So that is more about, so going back to prehistory, when obviously gender roles were more pronounced. So women as the primary caregivers, men going off to hunt. So making a fight-flight response in times of stress would not guarantee the survival of the woman and the child in any stress or dangerous situation. Whereas Tend Befriend, which was about reaching out, finding a consensus, some common ground, forming a community to deal with the problem, would. And so it's now thought across science. So I'll send you the paper. The paper is brilliant. It is called Tend Befriend. So my thinking was to think, well, can men learn, because obviously it's not genetically hardwired, can we learn how to do Tend Befriend? Can we acquire that skill? And therefore, because conflict is genuinely and generally stimulated by the male voice in the boardroom. And that's not to say, of course, that women aren't able to discover their inner Bodicea, let's say. And so the book, in the chapter Woman Up, it goes a whole load of exercise for men about how we might reach that nirvana, because there's loads of research about female CEOs being more profitable than male CEOs, And that's because they take a different approach to their management style. They're less risk averse. And this runs risk of being generalistic, possibly sexist, but undeniably, I've mounted all of the research, and it generally speaking and statistically speaking, women are better at business, and that's going to hurt. But it stacks up in the research. So female only quotas in interview process, I approve of all of those things. Loads of great research from the UN that says about political decision making is much better when women are involved. And again, sort of the parity in global politics is about 70-30. So 70% male, 30% women in globally elected and globally democratically elected parliaments. So UK is not reaching 30% yet. America certainly isn't. And some of the places, the progressive places where it's nearly 50-50 are countries in South America, actually, and places like that. So it's so I totally agree that. With what you're driving at there, Joanna, that there is that. How can we? I've spent a lot of time trying to navigate around and divert away. I'm going to be slightly crude, the sort of clarion call of my testicles, if you like, because that is the seat of the Sry gene that lives in me. I've never shied away from conflict. In fact, and I'm going to admit it, I actually enjoy conflict. So I sort of like the process of sorting it out. So I've had a particular problem in being a better leader, if you like, and that's what I don't agree is about. It's about how I've tried to take in a diverse perspective, so it's not my personal experience all the time, and it is stacked up with lots of research. But I'll send you a link to the article in the Telegraph, because it's still up there. It's online. You can see it's called Woman Up, Daily Telegraph, Michael Brown. You can see the general principle of it. But yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Michael.
Lovely.
Thank you, Joanne. Great question. And I'm sure Kathleen next to me was probably stewing as you pronounced that research, Michael, because it's Kathleen who put me on to Invisible Women, which basically tells you that every bit of research doesn't include women. And my daughter says that since I've been put on that by Kathleen, I've become an ardent 50+ feminist for the first time in my life. So thanks for that little bit of opening my eyes, Kathleen. As I say, pardon, Michael.
No, I should send you the receipt. The 10 Befriend research is fabulous. So
fabulous. Thanks. We'll put it in the thread if you share the link.
And I'll send you the Woman Up, my piece from the Telegraph, because then you don't have to buy the book.
Thank you. Thanks. Yeah. Thanks so much, Michael. Now, I'd like to, if you don't mind, speaking, Niluka. Niluka has an interesting question here about actually being allowed to disagree. Could you ask your question, Niluka?
Yeah, so it's fairly broad, but I wonder, I think we're seeing a world where division is potentially becoming greater. So we see it with Trump, we see it with Brexit, we see it where people become so fixed on a view and it almost becomes their identity. And I'm just keen to hear your thoughts around how we can navigate that, how we can start actually listening to each other again, and potentially link to that your views on cancel culture. And where is the line where people are allowed to have a view? Where is that, you know, the being able to have healthy debate, to listen to each other, to therefore kind of create this potentially, you know, productive collaboration and something out of it. But we're also seeing a world where people just can't even engage in the conversation, and just your thoughts on that.
No, it is a great question, and it's something I certainly do elaborate on in the book. And in fact, sorry, I didn't get your name. Can I see it on the bottom of the screen there? So it was
Niluka.
Maluka or Liluka?
No, Niluka.
Niluka. Apologies.
Yeah, thanks.
Well, it's interesting in context of what's happening out there in the, I guess, in the aftermath and the wake of the pandemic. Hopefully, we're in the wake of the pandemic, but if you're going back to the early days of that, if you like, sort of many, weren't they? We were baking bread. We rediscovered our kindness gene, and that sort of seems like a long time ago, doesn't it really? And so we've gone from clapping for carers, if you like, to uncaringly slapping down anyone who may not share the same views as us on everything, isn't it? It's from race, gender, equality, class, the wealth gap, whether the gap between the vaccines, should we have a vaccine, all of that stuff. And most people are capable, aren't they, of instantaneous combustion into what I'd describe as a bin kicking rage, if you like, at the mere mention of, well, that vaccine thing, the gap, if you like, between should it be 6 weeks, should it be 12 weeks? Remember that argument. So J.K. Rowling, so remember that one of recent. Should the trans people's rights to identify as trans trump, if you like, the safety of women in public places? That's a debate. So J.K. Rowling, as disagreeable as you like, if you may find any of her views, she got threatened with rape and murder for expressing a point of view, and that isn't acceptable. So it's difficult, isn't it, for any measured argument to cut through the clatter, if you like. But we've all stopped listening anyway, to echo your point, Lalika. So everywhere you look, some shouty influencer is pounding someone else or yourself for just daring to see things differently. But if you think about how we've evolved humanity as here, it's on the back of conflict after conflict, but also, shouldn't it be okay? It should definitely be okay, shouldn't it, to communicate the fact that you see things differently, and it should be equally okay for someone to disagree with your beliefs. That is totally normal human discourse. At least it used to be, didn't it? So obviously these days, as we keep going on, we're willing to hear out a rival perspective, and it's the loudest voices reducing the wider opinions to less than a whisper. So real debate, if you like, the art of debate has been lost. So in a very real sense, it's been put into lockdown, hasn't it? At the same time as we hopefully seem to be emerging from it. So it is a difficult thing to deal with. And my book is a whole 10-step guide to get people to actually understand that, yeah, there is somebody with a different point of view. And that is shaped by their own upbringing, by their culture, by their perspective, by their education, by their class, how much wealth they have, all of that sort of stuff. And how do we get people to understand that? And obviously social media has possibly exacerbated the situation. Well, not possibly, let's face it, definitely, because people behave differently. And this is about a lack of character. People are prepared to say the stuff they wouldn't say to somebody face to face on social media, and then retreat back to that bubble where everybody thinks the same as them. So they look out from their social media perspective and they don't see too much debate against their own point of view, but they only emerge from it like a crab, if you like, to just point a accusatory claw at somebody, at some passing comment that they don't agree with, and then retreat back into that. So I think social media has become a problem for us to navigate that. How we deal with that, that's probably the subject of a totally dedicated book. And obviously cancel culture. I can't agree with cancel. That non-platforming thing, because as disagreeable as somebody's extreme views are, that you'd have to know that person has those views so that you can acknowledge it, deal with it, and go from there. And there's another piece I did for the Telegraph. I'm going to try and get it up because there is a bit about how you deal with that, and it's a recent. So I'm going to try and get it up on I've got going onto my computer because there's a little bit of research in it, which I reference, and it's escaped me, but it's about dealing with that, and I can't quite find it unless I'm going to have to go onto the web to get the Telegraph article up itself. Just a minute, Nalika. Do you mind if I do this? Because it's quite an interesting bit.
No, thank you. I just, while you're doing that, I think it's really interesting the point you made about social media, because I think it almost creates, with the algorithm as well, you only end up seeing things that you already agree with. It fosters groupthink as well. Whereas in the real world, you're naturally just going to come across people who may have different views to you, and I think that's healthy. Whereas on social media, you create this almost vacuum, this groupthink, which then means it's almost so difficult and triggering when you then come across someone who does have a different view, because all you've been exposed to is what's on your feed.
Absolutely, absolutely. So here it is. I've got it. So sorry, I had to Google my own article. This isn't Woman Up. It's another article I did for the Telegraph not too long ago. This is good actually. So forgive me. I'm gonna read. I'm gonna try and hang on. I'll pull it. Yeah, I'm going to try it. So I'm going to have to look off camera as I read this, because the research is really, really interesting. And it was about, oh yeah, here we go. So I'm scrolling down to find the bit. I should have committed this to memory. It's a trick question. You caught me out. It links back to the dissimilar others thing. So and about being vigilant to your own personal biases while sharpening your cultural sensitivities, if you like. And then there's a practice which is called status affirmation. So this is good, actually. I think I might be able to take it from there. But status affirmation is the work of Dr. Corinne Bendersky, I think, at UCLA, so the Anderson School of Management. And she had a study back in 2014, and it showed how people with conflicting political views could be persuaded to view their opponent as less adversarial. I can't even pronounce the name, difficult to say, less conflict inducing. So she introduced the Dictator Game. Some people who've studied social sciences may know that. It's a famous experiment in psychology in which a player, the dictator, decides how to share a prize, which is usually a sum of money, with a second player. Now, the latter, that second player, has no influence over the decision of the dictator, and no rights of complaint should the dictator opt to share nothing. All they have is their persuasive powers. So they're literally locked in a room together. Now, you might expect, mightn't you, that when people play this game with strongly held opposing opinion, it will probably result in the dictator, who keeps the prize all the time, is unwilling to share because they're so opposed politically. But that wasn't the case. And it was thanks to status affirmation. So Badinsky, she screened the participants for their political affiliations around, so it's an American study, around a real hot topic issue of the day. So this was back in 2014, and that was around the so-called Obamacare legislation. And so Badinsky reported that dictators gave away an average of around 40% more of their prize, which in that case was a pot of 10 lottery tickets, American lottery tickets, to those opponents who disagreed with them about the Obamacare Act, but who had also affirmed the dictator's status. So whereas opponents who had merely shoutily disagreed with the dictator without doing the affirmation got nothing all the time. Now, how do you affirm someone's status in a disagreement? And it's about careful choice of words. And so, and it will start something like this, and obviously each disagreement is different, so there's no template, but you simply acknowledge your difference of opinion to your opponent by saying something like, I know we disagree about this, but, and then you begin to work in the affirmation. And obviously the exact wording, as I said, will vary depending on the topic, the subject, but it might be along the lines of, I really admire people of principle like yourself who can persuasively outline why they stand by their beliefs. Or it could be a slightly different take. I understand your position. I see your viewpoint is increasingly influential in the world, wider in the world. And then, so therefore you're affirming the status of your rival. And then you might then go on to outline your own argument and subject, of course, to any concession you might make to their point of view. So that's status affirmation. So if people knew how to do that, that might cause a more peaceful world. But going back to your other point, Nalika, which is, so there was that she gave some words of caution, and there's the Institute of Psychology, some research around there, which is at Keele University. So not Keele, Keele, which is K-I-E, which is urged for a recognition of equal status, not high status. And obviously we've all heard, haven't we, I disagree with what you have to say, but I'll defend to the death your right to say it. So that goes, so I'm on that with, so no cancel culture, no platforming. So worth bearing in mind next time we wade into a dispute with a firmly held opinion. So equal status is useful if you're in conversation with someone who genuinely holds extreme views that you are violently opposed to. So you're a liberal or left-leaning, and you're dealing with a populist right-winger. You would deal with them you would deal with them equal status, which is about, look, I recognise that you are a political party, you've got serious political opinions, some people take them serious, but you're not giving them higher status. So that's that's quite a complicated thing and is a potential minefield. But the status affirmation certainly is a working tool to try and create more equilibrium in the argument when you're in the room and when you engage face to face. It probably wouldn't work at social because, as I say, people react and behave differently. Yeah. Does that get anywhere near to what you was hoping to?
No, brilliant. Yeah, it was really, really, really insightful. And I think, what you're saying as well around how we're sort of moving away from being able to debate and actually what can we do to get back to that, I think is really powerful. Because through debate comes, creative thinking, comes better outcomes rather than siloed thinking and camps that just don't even want to engage. I think that's really dangerous. So thank you, really helpful.
Thank you. Thanks for the question too. It's great.
Thank you. Thanks, Niluka. Great question. And as you can all tell from the way Michael's dropped in all the different aspects of research, the book is absolutely packed with all of the different areas he researched to write the book. And really, there's so many more issues that he covers that he hasn't touched on. It covers understanding cultural body language. It discusses individualism versus collectivism, pride. Yeah, it's really packed, and lots of little, like Michael's been saying, lots of little tools that you can use to either assess the balance of your company in terms of how representative it is, different instructions to follow to understand somebody else's viewpoint. So it's a practical book. It's got interesting research, and it's quite funny as well. Michael, you have a good sense of humour. There's plenty of J-bombs, I think I called them. There's lots of little jokes dropped in there to sort of lighten the load, as it were, so that it's not a heavy read. So I really want to thank Michael for joining us today, and I hope that he's stirred you up to be interested in exploring it a bit more. We're not saying you can't argue, because there's nothing I like better than a good old argument, but we need to debate it logically, don't we, Michael, and not get the hot head. So thanks very much, Michael. Thank you everybody for joining us again. It's lovely to see you all here on Saturday afternoons. And I'm going to just hand back to Prakash to wrap up the event. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, everybody. Hope it was.
Thank you, Louise. Thank you, Michael. For people who joined us for the very second time, please keep on coming back, because we have fantastic guests like Michael who keep on coming down out here and give us the gift of their time and their wisdom. Number one. Number two, you get to make new friends, right? So many of us are regulars out here, so you end up knowing each other. You connect on LinkedIn, you get on Zoom calls, you make new friends, and life is better that way, right? The third thing is this book, I don't agree. It has been shortlisted in the Future of Leadership category at the Business Book Awards 2021. It's also in contention for the Business Book of the Year, which means if you like the book, do leave a review. I mean, show your love and support if you really like the book, right? Go and do that. The best is a review on Amazon, and that can possibly swing a couple of votes in his favor. So all the best to Michael with that. 2-3 things I'll leave it before we go. Number one, there's a nice F-bomb right in the preface of the book. And I know some of you guys love the language. So yeah, check out the book. We all love to smile a lot, but there are times when smiling can backfire. Chapter 6.
Yeah.
Why? Read a chapter 6, and there's a fantastic approach Michael has given towards understanding culture. He says, think of culture as clubs. There's a Christian club, there's an American club, there's a British club, there's a Muslim club, there's an Indian club, LGBT club, right? The moment you look at cultures as clubs, lives become very interesting. So maybe you are not from the club, but what's wrong with exploring how the club operates and behaves? So that kind of help become more empathic to other cultures. So chapter 6 and 7, my favorite in the book. Please wear your mask, stay safe. Michael, before you go, parting words from you to us all.
Well, I don't think I can be that. Thank you very much for your very kind words, and also thanks for. I really enjoyed it, and I can see. I'm just looking at the chat now, so I can see everybody's engaged. So, and I think from the tone of it, we're all in universal agreement. So maybe everybody has read "I Don't Agree" and is already practicing it. But no, I've enjoyed it. I hope. Look, one of the things I do want to say is that I'm certainly not an academic, and I'm not an expert at this. As I say at the end of the book, if I get conflict right in my life at least 50% of the time, then I will consider that an improvement to where I am now. So I'm definitely still learning, and hopefully I Don't Agree. The book, when you read it, will set you off on a few journeys. But as I say, I'm not claiming to be an academic, and I have added it has got a light touch as well. So hope you enjoy that. Hope you get it, and thanks for the flag up for the Business Book Awards as well, Prakash. Much appreciated. So if you do get it, please do give me a review on Amazon, because apparently the judges who are reading it next, the shortlist judges, because I've gone from long list to shortlist, apparently they are reading it over the next couple of weeks, and apparently they do go to Amazon to see what ordinary readers in inverted commas are saying about it. So I'm doing all right there. It's 5-star reviews at the moment, but yeah, thank you. I'm banging on now.
Thanks everyone. And if you do think of buying Michael's book, just hold on a day or so. Harriman House, his super publishers, have given me a discount code, which I'll put in the thread of the group for you. So super. See you all next week. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, everybody. Bye now.